everyone from a very sunny London. This is the EdTech Podcast, the show to improve the dialogue between ed and tech for better innovation and impact. And I'm just back from cycling across France, where we raised over £12,000 for our 3 chosen charities. So very pleased with that. Of course, instead of sunshine there, it was record rainfall, and some of the roads we cycled up have since been washed away, which is going to prove a big problem for the Tour de France organisers. But anyway, I'm straight back into the swing of things here with EdTech X and London EdTech Week. And next week, I'm also going to be part of a podcasting corner at the London Festival of Learning at UCL. So do come over and say hi if you're in town. You can charge your phones at the podcasting corner whilst you also listen to episodes of the EdTech Podcast and the Nevertheless podcast. What else this week? Well, the EdTech Podcast has joined the very brand new and shiny Google Podcast app for Android. So if you're a Google lover or you use Google apps, go and check us out there. It's also been a very exciting week for our latest episode, which was a special one-off with 3 students, Malika, Idil and Sungna from 621, a sixth form in Newham, London, who researched, produced and published their podcast as part of their real-world learning programme. So well done to all 3 of you, and I hope you enjoy if you've listened into that episode. I'm hoping very much to see them heading up NPR or Radiolab in the future. So what else can I report back on? Well, the EdTech Podcast Festival. If you haven't got your ticket yet, latest updates include 100 from Finland. We'll be running a workshop for teachers on innovations from around the world. Hackney Learning Trust will be sharing insights on their school improvement plan strategies. And the co-founder of Kahoot is going to be talking about putting learners at the heart of your EdTech design. This week's episode, however, what have we got in store? Well, this week's episode was recorded at the Global Education and Skills World Forum back in the spring and focuses very much on what blockchain means for education. So obviously blockchain could just be a very ethereal buzzword and focusing on the cryptocurrencies part and all of that. But actually we will be looking at what an indelible record could mean for student achievement, CVs, protecting the IP of current education providers and keeping learner records all together in one place. Notwithstanding some of the complications still with blockchain, so whether that's regulatory issues or actually the question of whether the value of those credentials going on the blockchain is something that we need to look at further. Anyhow, we are in conversation with Natalie Smolenski, a cultural anthropologist and the BizDev lead for BlockCert. And BlockCert is an open standard for creating, issuing, viewing and verifying blockchain-based certificates. It's initially a collaboration between MIT Media Lab and Learning Machine, but very much is looking to engage with other partners in their project. The second guest is Alex Greggs, who is founding director of the Commonwealth Centre for Connected Learning. He's also a co-author of a recent study on the blockchain in education, which was in collaboration with the European Commission, and he is a keen advocate for the early and open internet. I hope you enjoy this episode. If you do, please feel free to give us a tasty review on iTunes, Spotify or Google Podcasts now that we're there, and we would very much love you forever. Yay! Tell me who you are and what you do.
Okay, my name's Alex Gregg. I'm a strategist and I teach new media, and I'm an advisor to the Minister for Education and Employment in Malta, and I'm currently coordinating a nation-state pilot using block certs for the purpose of universal credentials on the blockchain.
Very, very interesting. And you were talking here with BlockCerts at the Global Education and Skills Forum. So can you tell us a little bit about exactly what you got into in that discussion?
Okay, so that's about 2 years of my life, right? So we don't have 2 years to discuss this.
Well, that's interesting because you were just telling me, so you also authored the Blockchain in Education report for the European Commission, is that correct?
Yes, I did. I'll speed up in terms of what happened. In about 2014, I had developed 2 key pieces of work for my country, which is Malta. One is a new lifelong learning strategy on the basis that most people your age will not have one career, but probably have 5 or 10. And the whole idea about education, which is in the hands of hegemonic institutions, which have been around for several centuries and still teaching in a way using 20th century models, all of that is rapidly going away. Anybody who has young children, I have a child age 15, I know that my son is not going to be in one job for all of his life. And it will have many different careers and probably will not have a job, will want to be a freelancer anyway. The whole notion of a lifelong learning strategy is that whether you're aged 21 and just coming out with your spanking new degree from some UK university, that's not going to be good enough to keep you gainfully employed for the rest of your life. Probably by the age of 50, people would have kicked you out. And also there are people age 50 who have to reinvent themselves like I did, because unlike most other people, I've been in my life a chartered accountant. I've been a strategist. I've been an advisor to a couple of prime ministers. I did a PhD late in my life and got myself into new media. I teach, and I change things. Okay, so that's the lifelong learning strategy. On the other side, we were also looking at new types of credentials on the basis that most people are now learning online, and that's again, knowledge in a classroom has to be reinvented on the basis that most decent knowledge can be found online now. There are various MOOCs and other, tools like that we can all use. So I came to the blockchain on the basis of those 2 things. Through serendipity and accident, I ended up in MIT Media Lab right about 2016, speaking to Philip Schmidt and Dan Hughes, the Learning Machine, and they were literally halfway through a project on using the blockchain as a means of notarizing credentials. So that was how I got into this. That's about 2016. You fast forward to what happened last year. Malta signed an MOU with Learning Machine to become the first nation state to literally start notarizing all education credentials in their widest format, from academic ones to informal learning, on the blockchain. The one important thing to realize is that even though we're in the 21st century, credentials are not going away, certificates are not going away. At the same time, you have kids like my kid who spend more time looking at a screen than looking at paper. We're still serving them with paper. The blockchain enables the institution to have a piece of technology, which means that it will only have to issue the certificate once and is foolproof and immutable. From that point onwards, the power really shifts onto the learner. The learner suddenly has copies of his or her credentials wherever they might be, transcripts of whatever has been achieved, and then it's the learner who decides who and what to share it with, including future employers. So that's my 2 years, yeah.
This is really, really fascinating. And I just mentioned, so in the context of, at the moment, I'm doing an online course. So talking about online learning on blockchain. And my homework this week was to look at a case study of blockchain in a particular sector. So I chose education. And so I completely get the immutable record of achievement. The question I was left with was, is there a bigger problem around the value of these different providers of education now? So lots of people providing different, whether it's credits or micro credentials or degrees. You've then got this record of achievement, but are we still stuck with the question of what's the value of each of those different providers?
Yeah, that's a different question. I mean, so is getting a PhD from MIT Media Lab at a par to my son getting an online certificate from Coursera for doing basic coding? I guess not. On the other hand, at the moment, for Jacob's stage in his life, getting whatever he got from Coursera helps him get onto another notch up in life. It depends on who you are and whom you want to communicate that value to. A lot of employers are extremely concerned that graduates are being churned out by the university system, whether it's in the UK, where you now have to pay quite a bit of money for your education, in the States, where it's a complete bloodbath in terms of people getting themselves into $150,000 worth of debt. Or the other side is where you have countries like mine that provide free education But a lot of people are saying, are those the right kind of skill set that I need when I then go and find a job? And in fact, what you do is you then speak to employers. You say, I'm faced with people who might have a bachelor's and a master's degree, but they can't communicate, they can't think critically, they can't think out of the box, they can't operate on their own. So there's a lot of, first of all, other credentials that people should be accumulating online to prove that, or for instance, in a competitive world, I was just speaking to somebody right now who said that the edge that she got was being able to speak different languages, and that's how she left Canada, went somewhere else. I mean, I remember in my younger days when I moved to London in 1985, I managed to wriggle myself into working for multinational companies simply because I could speak languages, and that was my way of traveling. Now, was being able to speak Italian or French, important for me at that stage in my life? Absolutely, for the kind of companies I was going for. So my view is that as you're going through life, a lot of these informal credentials, even professional ones, getting your Google AdWords certificate, getting a certificate on Cisco training, is that as important as a university degree? I would say for certain people in certain contexts, absolutely, if not more. Notarizing those certificates on the blockchain means that those certificates become yours as the learner, and then you can decide which elements of those, including the transcripts, to share it with. I remember when I had to do a PhD late in my life with the University of Hull, I had to write to the Association of Chartered Accountants and ask for transcripts of exams I had done 25 years ago. I had to pay a fee for doing that, which was a pain for me, a pain for the FCCA, and certainly of no relevance to what I was doing in my life because I had stopped being an accountant ages ago, but simply needed to prove to a university that asked me to join as a PhD student. Okay, so what the blockchain does, we have to look at it as an enabling technology to enable us to do things better than we're doing them right now. But credentials are not going away. Okay, we're still in the 21st century. You still have to prove to someone that what you've earned in your life is of worth to somebody else. But we simply have to move from paper into some other medium.
And if someone's listening in and they think, actually, we want to be the second country to go and do that, what lessons have you learned from, getting that actually happening in your country? Because a lot of that will be actioning, whether it's within the ministry or whether it's within the providers.
I think we'll share our slides, because I had a slide which talked about human networks. To get something like this done, you need to activate those human networks as opposed to the technology. The technology was pretty much ready and we knew it would work. Trying to get people to buy into this idea of credentials are there for life, lifelong learning. Somebody's got to see something in it for them. So in our case, you have to have purpose in this. So I had to engage with anybody from ministers for education, ministers of finance, all the way down to registrars within universities, all the way down to learners, all the way down to the media. And you have different messages for different people. The one message, though, which remains there is that key one. People understand credentials. People understand certificates. They equate them to social capital. They equate them to who I am and who I want to be. If you then get across to people that the blockchain till now has not been hacked, is immutable, is trustworthy, and that power shifts from the institution onto the learner, then things start to happen. Now, what's going to happen in the blockchain? Will other countries jump on the bandwagon? We're organizing a conference in May, as I was telling you, in Malta. And there are nation states that are piloting stuff. The Dutch government, for instance, have been looking at things, and they'll be speaking at this conference, have been doing this for a while. The government of the Bahamas, for instance, is also looking at this right now. There are entire countries like Estonia that have closed blockchains, okay? But I think you'll see different models evolving as we go along. I don't think the blockchain is going to go away. I think a lot of people are equating it at the moment with cryptocurrencies and get rich quick. I'm more interested in what can you do with this technology which gets away with intermediaries when the intermediaries' roles are redundant.
And then who pays for the technology to kick in, to work? Is it the learner? Is it the institution? Is it
the way we've done it in Malta, and it was the only way we really wanted to do it, was block certs is an open system, is an open standards. So it's there. If, anybody with a couple of PhDs can go around and look at the block certs code on GitHub and just start building applications on what essentially is it's like the same as Linux used to be, or WordPress, if I had to use a more silly analogy, I guess. In our case, it's the government that has decided to go for a pilot, and the pilots in Malta are very strategic. They're anything from the Institute for Tourism Studies to the National Commission for Further and Higher Education that is looking at reconfirming the credentials of people who arrive in Malta like refugees or people with incomplete credentials, and having reestablished that somebody's a doctor even if they fell off a boat, or somebody who said, I've missed, I've learned in several countries, but I've got a certificate missing. Once that certificate is reissued in Malta, these new certificates are notarized on the blockchain, so they're never lost again. But again, who's paying for it at the moment is the government of Malta that's paying for it. So learners don't have to pay a dime. All learners have to do at the moment, in terms of the issuing institutions. So we have the VET University and Malta College for Art Sciences and Technologies, National Commission for Further and Higher Education. All school kids at the age of 16, which is the first time that you can leave compulsory education, will have their school leaving certificate notarized on the blockchain. So we're going to have to see if this spreads organically, that learners start seeing value. Till now, it's been remarkable that kids look at it. I mean, most of the time they're looking at a screen anyway and not looking at you in the face. So it's about ease. How quickly can I, download this from Google Play or for the App Store, whatever it is. In 5 minutes, I've got my certificate. I can now share it on Facebook. I can, share it with my next employer. So the proof of the pudding is going to be in the eating now. Will learners engage quickly enough? Will employers see value in this? Can this become the norm? Will these credentials spread from being just education to becoming health records, birth certificates, death certificates? That's where we are right now.
Very, very interesting. Yeah, it's interesting that you said about Estonia and their closed blockchain. Because I think, in my sort of reading around this as well, I was looking at whether, you would have a dominant player. So it could be Blockcerts. Maybe it would be someone like LinkedIn.
Oh, it could be Microsoft. It can be Sony. It can be IBM. It can be Equitable. It can be
like a national player as well.
Absolutely.
Because there's merit in recognition around learning credentials that are domestic as well as international.
Yeah, I think we're at an interesting phase. I mean, you mentioned the report that we wrote. Whilst all this was happening, I was approached by the Joint Research Center of the European Commission, and what was supposed to be, can you, do a quick study for us, ended up being about 7.5 months. In a report I co-wrote with my colleague Anthony Camilleri, who's based in Ljubljana. And what the report recommends is that there is an opportunity for the European Commission to, in a way, look at what's happened with the internet. I happen to be one of these people who was extremely optimistic about the internet when I started dabbling with this many years ago with with one of my teachers, Howard Reingold, who's one of the fathers of the internet. You'll find most of us oldies are terribly disillusioned with what's happened with the internet, okay? That we now have a closed ecosystem, which is dominated by the Silicon Four. We don't need to name them. We all know who they are. There is an opportunity with the blockchain in terms of disintermediation and in terms of open standards. If entities like the European Commission started advocating, putting its money where its mouth is and supporting open education, open standards, and making sure that those projects then look at some way that somebody who's done a bit of a course in Malta, and then went to Copenhagen, then went to the States, and then had a gap here, that again saying that yes, we start to, Europe has a fantastic opportunity. We have something called the ECTS system, European Credit Transfer System in Europe. So we can kind of relate to bits and pieces of components of education if we wanted to. Notarizing these things on the blockchain in perpetuity, I still believe will add value to young people like yourself. Okay, and people like my son who's 15 and saying, the education I'm being given is not exactly what I want. I might take a gap year out. Maybe I should, get a job. I think you're going to see people rethinking what education is giving them, but I don't think a credential is ever going to go away. But Europe, the European Commission in particular, has an opportunity to right in what went wrong with the internet, where it got very much a closed system, is to support the whole ecosystem around an open blockchain as opposed to closed blockchains. And there will be closed blockchains, okay? Again, we don't know what the big suppliers are going to be doing. I don't know what's going to happen in the next version of Microsoft 11 or whatever it is, okay? And there will be open APIs and the rest of it. But in our case, when we made a decision, and I'm saying me here, I'm talking as somebody who's involved in policy making in Malta's education system. For us, open standards were absolutely essential because it means that if Learning Machine, the supplier, go out of business in 2 years' time, let's say, we can get a team from the University of Malta, and there is already a reason to be able to take that code and keep on developing it. That's very important where we're coming from. We did not want the kind of lock-in, in other words, that a lot of governments have with specific suppliers.
And if universities are listening in, because we have a few listeners from higher education, if they were kind of querying, is this to my advantage, or, will it disintermediate universities? What's your you must have had plenty of discussions with the universities around the value to them as well.
I've had discussions from anybody from MIT Media Lab. And when we were doing our study for the European Commission, so we spoke to anybody from University of Nicosia all the way to MIT Media Lab and people doing experiments. You'll find some very interesting experiments happening in Australia, for instance, which I always love the way the Australians think holistically about these things. It depends on the specific university. People like MIT Media Lab have a brand to protect. There are many people who forge MIT media certificates and say, I've got a PhD. This is one way of getting around that from a trust factor, which is why MIT will put some money into projects like this.
So Trump University.
Absolutely. So it would be up to it is in the university's interest also to say, I'm only going to do it once. I'm going to notarize it once, and after that, once the recipient has also activated his or her private key and downloaded the app or whatever it is, there it is. You've got your record. It's up to you. It's notarized. If in 10 years' time somebody comes to check on this, they will check with a hash that was a real certificate. You can also have, by the way, time-dependent certificates. So, for instance, if I don't pay my accountancy certificate, even though I wasted my life away spending 6 years becoming a chartered accountant, if I don't pay FCCA my subscription, they'll strike me off eventually, right?
So you
can actually have you can actually have smart contracts exactly built into this. So I think we're at the beginning of what is possible, and we're at the moment thinking of something very small, which is credentials, blockchain, and rethinking education. Once you start going the smart contracts way and start thinking of the Internet of Things, for instance, this whole thing is exponential. Right now, the challenge is that most people think it's cryptocurrencies and get rich quick.
Yes, there's a kind of perception issue around the word blockchain, which defers to Bitcoin, when actually the underlying technology is very, very interesting.
Well, Google banned any adverts related to blockchain last week, and following what Facebook did the previous week. Oh, absolutely. So even though, for instance, in our case, I run a foundation called the Commonwealth Center for Connected Learning, and we have, a conference on blockchain credentials. If we wanted to spend some money on Facebook ads, Facebook won't take our money at the moment.
But yeah, lots of other very, very questionable sort of search terms. And
absolutely,
that kind of thing.
Absolutely.
Wow. Very, very interesting. Yeah, on smart contracts, what I was thinking is in the UK, you've got your student loan, and the student loans company quite often let you continue to make payments even though you've already finished your payments.
Yes.
Whereas with a smart contract, you both know that it's finished and it's done, and that's kind of automated. But they could do that anyway. It's just a systems thinking
I'm
issue.
thinking of the University of Nicosia, for instance, that has a master's in cryptocurrencies, and they have a lot of students who come from Africa who can't, even if they have the money, can't afford to remit the money in one fell swoop. So what they're doing is they're actually paying money on a chunk by chunk basis, and they're using the blockchain as a way also of not just taking the money and they're being paid sometimes through Bitcoin for some of these courses, but also making sure that as people work their way through a degree, every single chunk of whatever they're achieving is again being accredited and notarized on the blockchain. Back to MIT Media Lab, there are many people who join a course and after year one disappear actually and go and do their own startup. In fact, for some people, if you're not starting your own startup within 1 year,
if you haven't dropped out, you haven't made
exactly.
it. Yeah.
Okay. So what I like about the blockchain is the enabling technology aspect. Okay, rather than the geeky thing. What can you do with the blockchain to address problems that we have right now? Can we use the blockchain to account for the fact that many kids are being served a certain type of education in a classroom which still looks very Victorian, and people being served education through rows, people who are still getting punitive exams as opposed to modular exams? Can we put the blockchain on the basis of what it can do to good use and acknowledge the fact that most kids run back home from school, put their headphones on, and it's almost like they morph in a different world. We must stop as educators keeping on the mantra that, everything which is on Wikipedia is bad. And you should listen to some educator, who's probably my age and is still serving the same slides that he or she was serving about 20 years ago. Okay. The kids don't lie. We need to give kids what they need now for the jobs that they have, that they need in the future.
And what about ICOs in relation to blockchain companies that are engaging with education? So, for example, the case study that I was looking at recently was the Open Source University. I don't know if you've heard of them, but I was sort of wondering whether there would be a jarring between raising money for a blockchain and education company, and then, the education sector may not look that favourably on that form of raising money for a company. And I'm not sure how much value the tokens will have.
I can't give you a straight answer. I wouldn't even say I don't know. I will sit on the fence on this one. I think there are good actors going the ICO route who have a strategy and whose heart is in the right place. And there are bad actors who are going in. I know of extremely good actors that have almost like an Uber platform, which is regulated, to the nth degree to make sure there's no money laundering going on. And I know bad actors. It's the same as any other business at the end of the day. I mean, I worry about that the blockchain is deemed to be synonymous with get rich on the Bitcoin and using Bitcoins and stuff like that. I'm more interested in what you can do with the technology. But the route to funding new businesses can very well be via an ICO. I think anybody looking at those kind of businesses has to look at the old thing. Who are the people? What is the track record? Is there a value proposition over here? Is basic old financial stuff. Then how you choose to raise the money is a totally different issue.
And so if people are listening in and they want to read your 171-page report...
Oh, gosh, yeah. Good luck. Yeah. Well, I think there are two ways. If you Google, I think blockchain in education, JRC or European Commission, the report will pop up. The proof of the pudding is going to be, will young people, I believe, see value in this? But also, sadly, will older people who are now in charge of the institutions also see value in this and to make some investments?
Well, it's very interesting on that one because I've just come from the kind of fake parliament area, and they were debating about whether ageing demographics are good or bad for education, I suppose. And I suppose part of that is, if we're living this 100-year life cycle, then, as you were saying earlier, by the time you're 70, you will still need those credentials and you'll be adding more still. So
I'm 56 years old. I saw my first computer when I was 23 in Chancery Lane. And it cost about 3,600 sterling. It was called the IBM Portable. People will laugh at it when they see it, but that's the technology we had, all the way up to mainframe computers and things like that. So yeah, people are living longer. I have an 88-year-old father-in-law who teaches at the University of the Third Age. And I know some very stupid 15-year-olds who were born with technology but are not making mindful use of technology. There is a myth in academia, which is, in a way, Mark Prensky has a lot to blame for, which is the digital natives, digital migrants thing, which I never subscribed to. But resonates initially, because again, you only have to look at a baby being dumped, instead of talking to the child, we now give screens, which means we now have generations of people who can't write properly, can't speak, can't communicate. I think older people like me now is really the time to understand that the old business model for education is severely disrupted because of the Coursera's of this world and the edXs of good players like the edXs of this world and the future learners of this world. And they just have to watch their kids. We need to find a good middle ground. At the end of the day, in the same way that when I teach, it's challenging now to teach people who have screens in front of me like shields, and I have to find some way of making my teaching on the day resonate with their lives enough to enable them to either close the screen in front of them or else use the screen, for example, like I do, to make them ask questions which they're scared of asking. So I use tools like Slido, for instance, to get people to ask questions during the class. And I can ask questions at the same time, and people can respond in real time. We have to put technology to good use. It's the same thing with the blockchain. You can, it's like having a car. You can have a car to go out with your girlfriend or your boyfriend and have a great night out. Or you can use this ISIS style and go and knock down a whole bunch of people.
There's a quote, isn't there, about technology being neither evil nor a good force, but being neutral. So
I never believed in when Google said, do no evil, or anything like that. It's necessarily not. Well, it's not neutral, but it's. We need a mindfulness, and I would go back to a lot of the work that Howard Rheingold did early on with things like smart mobs and like net smarts about 5-6 years ago. We need media literacy. We need digital literacy. We don't teach this well enough in the class. Or if we teach it, we seem to think it's just some other subject. We have a huge problem in the classroom, in the boardroom, and in the home, and we're not addressing this. I'm not saying the blockchain is going to save any of this, because I know, though, we need to bridge this old world that partly my generation is responsible for and what our kids need. And the screen is not going to go away for the time being. Neither is the certificate.
Well, thank you so much, Alex. That's been really fascinating. Okay, so after talking to Alex and having that fantastic conversation about blockchain and education, I'm now here also with Natalie Smolenski, who's VP of BizDev and also cultural anthropologist at Learning Machine. So welcome.
Thank you so much.
We were just having a really fascinating conversation also, which I failed to record, and now we finally picked up the microphone. I guess what we were talking about is how we prevent the re-centralization of blockchain in education, keeping things simple. Perhaps where we could start is exactly how you got into this space, got into Learning Machine as well, and some of the conversations you've been having here at the Global Education Skills Forum.
Absolutely. So my background is actually as a social scientist. I am very interested in the social impacts of technology, and blockchain technology in particular piqued my interest because it represents a new paradigm of governance as we move into the 21st century. I came to Learning Machine somewhat fortuitously through an opening that was available, and I immediately jumped on it. This has been a wonderful role. I feel like I get to build the future every day. There's nothing that compares to that. Here at GESF, I've had some wonderful conversations with a number of ministries from different countries, all of whom it seems have some awareness of blockchain technology, and it's something they've been exploring, but have been a little murkier about what the actual applications are. And so often coming across block certs is like a revelation, because they're like, oh, there's something in the market today that's actually being used, and that is based on an open standard. So I don't have that worry about vendor lock-in that I might with a proprietary solution. That also connects to your earlier question about decentralization. One of the ways that technology gets centralized is when vendors launch proprietary solutions that lock users into their particular ecosystem, which is something we certainly didn't want to happen for blockchain-based records, because from our vantage point, the whole promise of blockchain technology is a decentralized infrastructure. So you're not beholden to issuing institutions or to software providers to own your data, to verify your data, and to share your data as you see fit.
And was there any sort of pattern in terms of some of those ministries that you spoke to? Which parts of the world were they from?
Yeah, that's a good question. So a couple of them were from Eastern Europe. So I spoke with the ministers of Bulgaria, someone from the Ministry of Education in the Ukraine, and from Turkey as well. So what's interesting about the adoption of blockchain technology is that we're seeing countries that have sometimes been considered to be on the peripheries as actually some of the earliest adopters. So, for example, the Ukraine has signed the largest deal ever to put all government records on the blockchain. Georgia has been a pioneer of blockchain technology. Countries like Malta, the Bahamas, all of them are trying to get in on this because they see real value.
From a sort of a learner's perspective as well, just thinking about your anthropology role, what are the implications? Obviously, we can imagine, and we've spoken previously a bit about the implications for universities, etc. What's the kind of wider social implications in terms of learners? And that can be quite a broad term. So anyone who's going from early years through their education journey to, someone in their 60s who's reskilling or upskilling. What are the kind of social implications, and what do you think the sort of experience will be as we shift from perhaps that traditional pathway to one that can be enabled through education credentials on the blockchain?
Right. So what we find is we're still living in a credential-based world. So in order to advance on your learning journey, whether it's, moving from kindergarten to middle school or junior high, or getting, the most advanced PhD degree, you need to have some way to reliably document your prior learning. Just today, in my conversation with the Deputy Education Minister from Bulgaria, she was saying that within the EU, there's a big problem that as early as elementary school, we have students who are leaving to study in other countries with their parents, and then when they repatriate to their countries of origin, often are held back a year or more. And this has the effect of increasing dropout rates and increasing dissatisfaction with the school system. And of course, they're being held back because it's very difficult to establish credit equivalencies between these institutions. So what the blockchain allows for is it's actually building out kind of infrastructure of translation that allows for the mobility and interoperability of credentials across geographic borders within different technological systems so that learners can seamlessly move from one context to another without having opportunities foreclosed.
So that's really interesting, because one of my big questions was around, I absolutely get the application of, having your immutable record of learning on blockchain. There's a bigger question perhaps around the value of these different credentials and how we kind of make an equivalent between, whether it's micro credentials, a degree online, etc. Can you imagine a phase 2 of BlockCert which adds some way of measuring the value of those different providers?
That's a great question, and it's one we've encountered in multiple contexts. There are, in the U.S., for example, a number of nonprofit organizations that deal with basically evaluating the relative quality of education of different institutions. Within the EU, there's a whole qualifications framework that is used to measure institutions, and that is attempting to slowly quantify educational value. This we consider as actually a separate initiative from the technology standards that enable verification of the integrity of the document itself. So if you think about standardization efforts, you can divide them into 3 categories. On the one hand, there are technology standards, which are kind of let's say the rails that get you from point A to point B. In the second type of standard, you have content standards. So what is it that is moving from point A to point B? What does it mean in context? And that's a very human decision. So this is something that blockchains can't yet do. And I would argue that we might actually be better for that. There's a third type of standard as well, which is a standard of exchange. And that is, what is this particular content worth on the market? So for example, what is my bachelor's degree from Oxford going to be worth? What kind of jobs can I convert that into? How much was it worth to me or to my family to actually attend that institution? So those 3 standards they're actually solving for different questions. And what the blockchain is solving for and the BlockCert's open standard is solving for is that first type of standard, the technology standard.
Very interesting. And how can people follow with, how you're developing or what your particular work is?
Absolutely. So you can find me on Twitter at @Smolenski. You can also contact us at any time through, the Learning Machine website. So that's learningmachine.com. If you're interested in kind of some thought leadership in this area, please do check out our blog. It's on medium.com. And if you just search for Learning Machine blog, it'll come right up. There are lots of articles there that may be interesting.
And final question, we have a book club through the podcast, so guest recommendations of books that have impacted the way they think. I wondered if you had any that, either relate to this, your anthropology perspective, or just books that you really love and you'd like to share with our listeners.
Absolutely. So I would say there are a couple. One is, first of all, anything by Paul Vigna and Michael Casey. The Age of Cryptocurrency in particular is what first got me thinking about the social impacts of blockchain technology. From an anthropological standpoint, Debt by David Graeber is a masterpiece, I think. And it has really informed how I've been understanding the creation and circulation of value via blockchain technology.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, and hope you have a great next couple of days as well.
Wonderful. Thank you.
That's all for this week's episode. Thanks to Natalie and Alex, and go and check out the Block Certs blog and Alex's report that I mentioned earlier. We're also now placing adverts for our summer episodes of the EdTech Podcast, so if you'd like to say hello to our listeners, please do get in contact about how to do that. That's all for us for now, and have a great week.